hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Wells Camden stood at the edge of the vineyard, watching the sun dip below the mountains. His fingers traced the small velvet box in his pocket, a habit he developed over the past week. The ring inside wasn't flashy, but it was perfect for Lakin. 3 carats, emerald cut, clean lines, just like their relationship. Or so he thought. I found it, he whispered to himself, pulling the box out and opening it. The diamond caught the last rays of sunlight. Stability, that word had defined his entire life's pursuit. At 36, Wells had built everything from nothing. Foster homes had taught him self-reliance. Group homes had taught him caution. And the streets had taught him to plan meticulously. His phone buzzed. Lakin's name flashed across the screen, still at the office. Don't wait up. Big presentation tomorrow. Wells texted back. Good luck. I'll be here when you finished it. He tucked the phone away and continued his walk through what would soon be their wedding venue, if she said yes. The vineyard owner had already agreed to his proposal plan. A private sunset dinner among the vines, followed by a weekend in the guest house. Wells had never considered himself lucky until Lakin Drew walked into his investment firm 3 years ago. She was captivating, smart, ambitious, and seemingly genuine. With her cascading dark hair and sharp green eyes, she commanded the room during her pitch for a lifestyle brand partnership. Planning for tomorrow, a voice broke his concentration. Wells turned to find Zadie Moss approaching, her practical boots crunching on the gravel path. As his closest friend and business partner, she was the only person who knew about the upcoming proposal. Always, Wells replied, tucking the ring box back into his jacket pocket. Zadie's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She'll say yes. What woman wouldn't? There was something in her tone that made Wells pause, but he dismissed it. Zadie had always been protective of him. She'd been there through his darkest times, when the foster system had failed him, when he'd worked 3 jobs to put himself through business school. The vineyard's perfect, Zadie continued, surveying the property. A bit extravagant for a proposal, though. Wells shook his head. It's an investment. We'll have our wedding here, too. You're always thinking ahead, she said, then check her watch. I should head back. Early meeting tomorrow. As Zadie walked away, Wells returned to planning mode, mentally checking details for the 6th time. The proposal was scheduled for next month, after they closed the Henderson account, his biggest, yet he pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos, stopping at one of Lakin. She was laughing, caught in a candid moment during their trip to Seattle last year. That was before she'd gained 15,000 more Instagram followers. Before her face had become more calculated in photos. Walking back to his car, Wells wondered when he'd last seen that genuine laugh. The thought dissolved as he started the engine. He had a meeting with his lawyer tomorrow to add Lakin to his will. Another step toward permanence. The drive back to their downtown Asheville condo took 20 minutes. Despite Lakin's text, Wells was surprised to find the lights on. He entered to find her curled on the sofa, scrolling through her phone. I thought you were working late, he said, hanging his jacket by the door. Lakin looked up, her expression shifting from absorbed to attentive so quickly that Wells almost missed the transition. The presentation prep went faster than expected, she said, putting her phone down. Where were you? Meeting with a client, he replied. Not technically a lie, the vineyard owner was now a client. Hungry. Lakin stood and stretched. Already ordered. Should be here any minute. She crossed the room and kissed him, her arms wrapping around his neck. Wells breathed in her familiar scent, something expensive that she'd started wearing after her first sponsored post. I have news, she said, pulling back with a smile that didn't quite meet her eyes. Merritt Knox wants us at her dinner party next weekend. It's going to be filmed for her blog. Wells suppressed a grimace. Merritt Knox was an up-and-coming food blogger whose events were more about social media than actual socializing. But these connections were important to Lakin's growing influence in the lifestyle space. I'll be there, he said. And there's something else, Lakin continued, her fingers playing with the collar of his shirt. Roan called today. Wells felt himself stiffen. My brother called you? Why? He's back in town. Wants to reconnect. Lakin's tone was casual, but her eyes watched his reaction carefully. Wells hadn't seen Roan in nearly 2 years. Their last meeting had ended with Wells paying off yet another of his younger brother's debts, a pattern established since childhood. Did he say why he's back? Wells asked, moving away from Lakin to pour himself a glass of water. Just that he's finished finding himself in Thailand. Or was it Tibet? She waved her hand dismissively. He mentioned staying for your birthday next month. Wells nodded, processing this information. Roan's reappearances usually coincided with financial difficulties or when he needed something. The timing, with the proposal approaching, was inconvenient. He's family, Wells finally said. We'll make time for him. Lakin smiled and returned to the couch. That's why I told him. Family is everything. She picked up her phone again, her attention already drifting away. Wells watched her for a moment, wondering why the word family sounded rehearsed coming from her lips. Lakin had once mentioned being estranged from her parents, though she'd been vague about the details. The doorbell rang their dinner delivery. As Wells moved to answer it, he caught Lakin's reflection in the hallway mirror. For just a second, before she realized he could see her, her face was completely blank, emotionless. Then her practiced smile slid back into place. Wells filed the observation away, a habit from childhood. When noticing small changes in foster parents' moods could mean the difference between a peaceful night or another placement, he paid the delivery person and returned with their food. They ate in comfortable silence, both scrolling through emails. This was their routine, professional, organized, predictable. Later that night, as Lakin slept beside him, Wells stared at the ceiling, thinking about his brother's return and the changes he'd noticed in his fiancée. Small things, new friends he hadn't met, events she attended without him, the way she'd started locking her phone. Trust had never come easily to Wells. His childhood had taught him that security was temporary, that people left. Lakin had been the exception until recently. He turned to look at her sleeping form, wondering if the changes were all in his head. Planning a future meant taking risks, opening yourself to loss. Wells closed his eyes, pushed the doubts away, and forced himself to sleep. The Saturday morning sun streamed through the windows of their condo as Wells finished his workout. Sweat dampened his shirt as he completed his final set of push-ups 50, as always. Discipline was the foundation of his life. The front door opened, and Lakin entered carrying 2 coffee cups. She'd started rising early for weekend runs recently, another new habit. I brought you black coffee, she said, setting 1 cup on the kitchen counter. Wells stood, wiping his face with a towel. Thanks. Good run. Amazing. The river trail was practically empty. She took a sip from her cup, studying him over the rim. Don't forget we're meeting Roan for lunch. Wells nodded, reaching for the coffee. The bitter liquid matched his mood. After 2 years of silence, his brother had arranged a lunch meeting through Lakin rather than contacting him directly. I should shower, he said. Lakin caught his arm as he passed. Hey, it'll be fine. He's trying. Wells looked down at her hand on his arm. You've been talking to him a lot. Just trying to help. He's your brother, Wells. She released his arm and stepped back. Family is complicated. I get that. You never talk about your family, he pointed out. Lakin's expression closed off slightly. Nothing to talk about. You know that. She turned away, effectively ending the conversation. An hour later, they pulled into the parking lot of a trendy downtown restaurant. Wells spotted his brother immediately. Same unruly dark hair, same easy smile that had charmed teachers, social workers, and countless women. Wells. Roan stood as they approached the outdoor table, arms spread wide. Man, look at you. Still built like a brick wall. Wells accepted the hug stiffly. Good to see you, Roan. His brother turned to Lakin, his smile widening. And the beautiful bride-to-be. Roan embraced Lakin, holding the hug a beat too long. Wells noticed her hand lingering on his brother's back before they separated. I grabbed us a bottle of rose, Roan said, gesturing to the wine as they sat. Still your favorite, right, Lakin? Wells paused. He couldn't recall Lakin ever mentioning Rose as her favorite. Perfect, she replied, smiling warmly at Roan. The waiter appeared, taking their food orders before retreating. An awkward silence descended until Roan cleared his throat. So 2 years. I owe you both an explanation. You don't owe me anything, Wells said evenly. Roan laughed, the sound both familiar and grating. Always the stoic big brother. But I do. After you bailed me out of that mess in Colorado. The gambling debt, Wells clarified. Right? That was rock bottom for me. Roan leaned forward. I needed to find purpose. So I traveled. Did some soul-searching in Southeast Asia. Worked at a dive shop in Thailand. Volunteered at a monastery. Wells took a sip of water, saying nothing. He'd heard similar stories before. I'm different now, Roan continued. More focused. I'm even starting a business. What kind of business? Wells asked. Wellness retreats, combining meditation, adventure, and local cuisine. Roan turned to Lakin. Actually, it's similar to what you're building with your lifestyle brand. Lakin brightened. That's why we've been talking so much. The synergy potential is huge. Wells looked between them. You've been discussing business partnerships? Just brainstorming, Lakin said quickly. Nothing concrete. Actually, Roan interjected, Lakin's been invaluable. She's got the social media presence my concept needs. Their food arrived, temporarily halting the conversation. Wells watched as Roan and Lakin fell into animated discussion about content creation and audience engagement. They referenced previous conversations, inside jokes he wasn't part of. You two seem close, Wells observed during a lull. Roan glanced at Lakin before answering. We've been FaceTiming about business ideas. Lakin's been mentoring me. I didn't know that, Wells said, looking at his fiancée. Lakin shrugged. It didn't seem important to mention. Just helping family. The word family, again, wielded like a shield. Wells studied her face, searching for deception, but Lakin had already turned back to Roan. Tell Wells about your investor meeting, she prompted. As Roan launched into another story. Wells noticed how Lakin leaned toward his brother, how her laugh seemed more genuine than it had in months. Small details accumulated, her hand brushing Roan's when reaching for the wine, their shared glances when inside references were made. Halfway through lunch, Lakin's phone chimed. That's Merritt, she said, checking the message. Confirming next weekend's dinner. She wants to know if Roan can come too. I wouldn't want to intrude, Roan said, though his expression suggested otherwise. Don't be silly, Lakin replied. Merritt would love your energy. Plus, you can network for your retreat business. Wells watched this exchange silently. The invitation hadn't been extended to Roan initially, that had been Lakin's doing. So it's settled, Lakin concluded, typing a response. The three of us next Saturday at Merritt's. Wells nodded, forcing a smile. Sounds good. The rest of lunch passed with Wells observing more than participating. As they prepared to leave, Roan insisted on paying with legitimate money. He joked, I in the parking lot. Roan hugged Lakin goodbye, whispering something that made her laugh. Then he turned to Wells. Thanks for giving me another chance, brother. It means everything. Wells shook his hand. Everyone deserves a second chance. As they drove home, Lakin chatted enthusiastically about Roan's business ideas, how they could help him establish connections. He's really changed, she insisted. Don't you think? We'll see, Wells replied, keeping his eyes on the road. The next week brought more instances of Lakin and Roan's growing closeness. Wells would return from work to find them huddled over laptops at the dining table, planning content strategies. Twice, he overheard them laughing in the kitchen, their conversation stopping abruptly when he entered point one evening. Wells arrived home early to find them on the balcony, standing closer than necessary. Lakin's hand was on Roan's arm, her expression earnest. They jumped apart when the door slid open. You're home early, Lakin said, her smile too bright. Meeting ended sooner than expected, Wells replied, looking between them. What's going on? Showing Roan some potential retreat locations, Lakin said, holding up her tablet. Santorini has amazing light for photos. Wells nodded slowly. Santorini, where we talked about honeymooning. An awkward pause followed. I should go, Roan said, gathering his things. See you both Saturday at Merritt's. After Roan left, Lakin busied herself with dinner preparations, avoiding Wells' gaze. Is there something I should know? Wells finally asked. Lakin turned, her expression frustrated. Like what, Wells? What are you implying? You tell me. You've been spending a lot of time with my brother. For his business. For our family connection. She emphasized the word our, in a way that made Wells' jaw tighten. I'm trying to build a relationship with him because he's important to you. Wells said nothing, weighing her words against what he'd observed. Do you trust me? Lakin asked, her voice softening as she approached him. I want to, he admitted. She wrapped her arms around his neck. Then trust me. There's nothing going on. Wells nodded, returning her embrace. But that night, as they lay in bed, he caught her checking her phone, smiling at a message before quickly locking the screen. The vineyard proposal plan suddenly seemed very far away. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear blue skies, and comfortable temperatures ideal for Merritt Knox's backyard gathering. Wells adjusted his collar as they pulled up to the sprawling Tudor home on the outskirts of Asheville. Remember, this is being filmed for her blog, Lakin reminded him, checking her makeup in the visor mirror. Be personable. Wells nodded. I'll do my best. And try to look happy about Roan being here, she added. People love a good family reunion story. Before Wells could respond, Merritt appeared at their car, camera crew in tow. Her signature eccentricity was on full display, a flowing floral dress paired with combat boots. Her pink-streaked hair pulled into an elaborate updo. The power couple arrives, Merritt exclaimed, pulling Lakin into a hug while the cameras rolled. And where's the prodigal brother? Roan's meeting us here, Lakin replied, effortlessly sliding into her public persona, more animated, voice pitched slightly higher. Wells followed them inside, nodding politely at the various influencers and local entrepreneurs Merritt had assembled. The backyard had been transformed with string lights, rustic tables, and elaborate food stations, all perfectly positioned for optimal filming angles. Wells Camden. Merritt turned to him once they reached the patio. The man who makes the magic happen behind the scenes. Without you, Lakin's brand would be just another pretty Instagram feed. Lakin's success is her own, Wells replied diplomatically. So modest. Merritt laughed, turning to the nearest camera. This is why power couples work, folks. Complementary energies. Lakin squeezed his arm, her silent signal that he'd said the right thing. Wells accepted a drink from a passing server, scanning the crowd for his brother. Roan arrived 20 minutes later, making an entrance that drew all eyes. He'd always had that ability to command attention simply by existing. Today, he was dressed more carefully than usual in a tailored blue shirt that Wells recognized as a brand Lakin had recently promoted. Sorry I'm late, Roan announced, embracing Merritt like an old friend though they'd never met. Traffic was brutal. Worth the wait, Merritt declared, visibly charmed. Everyone, this is Roan Camden, wellness entrepreneur and brother to our very own Wells. Wells noticed how Roan's introduction centered on his connection to them leveraging their established reputation. Some things hadn't changed. The gathering progressed with Merritt's carefully choreographed activities, a tour of her herb garden, a mixology demonstration, and finally, the main meal. Wells found himself seated between Lakin and Inez Landry, Lakin's former college roommate. Wells, Inez said quietly as the others engaged in louder conversations. It's been a while. Almost a year, he agreed. He'd always appreciated Inez's straightforward nature, no social media presence, no brand partnerships, just an academic passion for literature that had once aligned with Lakin's own interests. How's the English department? He asked. Thriving. Just got my book contract. Inez glanced past him to where Lakin was engaged in animated conversation with Roan across the table. And you? How's everything? Something in her tone suggested concern beyond casual interest. Good, Wells replied automatically. Busy with work. Inez nodded, studying him. You know, Wells, some people aren't who they present themselves to be, especially those skilled at crafting narratives. Before Wells could respond, Merritt tapped her glass, calling for everyone's attention. Before dessert, I believe our groom-to-be has something special planned. Wells froze. He hadn't planned anything, but all eyes turned to him expectantly, including Lakin's, though her expression held something unreadable. Merritt continued. Wells, we've set up the perfect moment for your wedding toast. The cameras are ready when you are. Understanding dawned. Merritt had misinterpreted something. Perhaps Lakin had mentioned their engagement, and Merritt had assumed a formal wedding announcement was planned for her event. Now everyone was waiting, Wells stood slowly, mind racing. The vineyard proposal was weeks away, but he could adapt. He reached for his wine glass, buying time to collect his thoughts. First, I'd like to thank Merritt for bringing us all together, he began. Supportive murmurs circulated around the table. Wells caught Roan watching him with an odd expression, anticipation mixed with something else. Lakin and I have been engaged for 6 months now, Wells continued, looking at his fiancée. And in that time, I've been planning our future together. A future built on trust, loyalty, and honesty. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against his wallet where he kept a photo of them, not the ring, which was still hidden at home. But the gesture was enough to make several guests gasp in anticipation. To new beginnings, Wells said, raising his glass. And to keeping our promises. As the guests lifted their glasses, Lakin suddenly stood. The movement was abrupt, drawing all attention to her. Something in Wells' instincts flared in warning. Actually, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the suddenly quiet gathering, I have something to say. She moved away from the table, creating space. The camera crew adjusted, following her movement. Wells remained standing, glass still raised, as an inexplicable dread settled over him. Wells is right about new beginnings, Lakin continued, about trust and honesty, which is why I can't continue with something that doesn't feel right. Confused murmurs rippled through the guests. Wells lowered his glass slowly. Lakin, he said quietly, what are you doing? She didn't look at him. Instead, her gaze fixed on Roan, who was now watching her with widening eyes. The heart wants what it wants, Lakin announced. And sometimes we have to be brave enough to admit when we've made a mistake. In one fluid motion that appeared spontaneous but struck Wells as rehearsed, Lakin moved in front of Roan's chair and dropped to one knee. Gasps erupted around the table. Roan Camden, she said, loud enough for the cameras to catch every word. From the moment you came back into our lives, I've been fighting this feeling. But I can't deny it anymore. You're the one I want to build a future with. Roan's shock appeared genuine for a split second before his expression shifted to emotion that matched the moment's theatricality. His eyes glistened with tears that seemed to appear on command. Will you marry me? Lakin finished, producing a small box from her pocket, a box Wells had never seen before. The silence that followed was absolute. Every eye moved between the 3 points of this unexpected triangle. Lakin on her knee, Roan with tears streaming down his face, and Wells completely still. Then Roan nodded, choking out a yes that broke the tension. The gathering erupted in confused exclamations and awkward applause as Roan pulled Lakin to her feet and into an embrace that crossed the line from affectionate to intimate. Wells stood motionless, watching this performance unfold. His mind registered details with hyperclarity. The way the cameras moved in for close-ups, how Merritt's initial shock transformed into delighted calculation at the content she'd just acquired, Inez's hand reaching toward him in silent support. Someone tried to speak to him, but Wells didn't hear the words. His focus narrowed to Lakin and Roan, still entangled, now kissing as though no one else existed, as though Wells himself had already disappeared. With deliberate control, Wells set his glass down on the table. The sound was barely audible, yet it seemed to catch Lakin's attention. She finally looked at him, her expression a complex mixture of defiance and what appeared to be anticipation, as if waiting for his reaction, for the drama his pain would provide. Wells offered nothing. Not anger, not shock, not devastation. His face remained impassive as he straightened his jacket, nodded once to Merritt, and walked away from the table. Wells! Lakin called after him, her voice carrying the perfect note of conflicted emotion. We should talk. He continued walking, his back straight, steps measured. Behind him, the murmurs grew, the cameras kept rolling, and the spectacle continued without its intended victim's participation. Wells reached his car, started the engine, and drove away from Merritt Knox's perfectly staged backyard betrayal. His phone began buzzing with notifications the footage was already being uploaded, the story spreading. But Wells Camden had stopped playing his assigned role. He had work to do. Roan Camden woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains. His head throbbed. the result of too much celebratory champagne after yesterday's dramatic events. Beside him, Lakin slept on her stomach, dark hair spread across the pillow as he reached for his phone, unsurprised to find dozens of notifications. Merritt's video had gone viral overnight. Hashtag BBQ proposal was trending, with opinions divided between those who found the story romantically impulsive and those condemning Lakin's public betrayal. Either way, they were getting attention. Exactly as planned. Roan slid out of bed and padded to the bathroom. As he washed his face, he studied his reflection. At 32, he still had the same charming features that had made life easier, the smile that convinced landlords to accept late rent, the eyes that made women forgive his disappearances. But something fell off this morning. The victory tasted less sweet than anticipated. Returning to the bedroom, he noticed a small envelope on the nightstand that hadn't been there last night. His name was written on it in Wells' precise handwriting. Roan froze. When had Wells been here? How had he entered without waking them? With cautious fingers, he opened the envelope. Inside was a note and something small and metallic. He tipped the object into his palm, the engagement ring Lakin had presented yesterday. Except it wasn't the same ring. The stone that had appeared to be a diamond under Merritt's mood lighting was clearly cubic zirconia in the morning sun. The band wasn't even proper gold, just cheap metal already beginning to discolor. Roan unfolded the note with a growing sense of unease. Keep the costume jewelry. You two always loved playing dress-up. W. Lakin, Roan said, his voice sharper than intended. Wake up, she stirred, blinking sleepily before her social media smile appeared. Morning, fiancé. Look at this. He held out the fake ring and note. Lakin's smile vanished as she sat up, snatching both items. What the hell? This isn't the ring I bought. Apparently Wells decided to upgrade our prop, Roan said, attempting humor though his stomach had knotted uncomfortably. How'd he get in here? Lakin looked around the bedroom, her bedroom in the condo she shared with Wells. More importantly, where is he now? Roan asked. Lakin was already reaching for her phone. I'll call him. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again with the same result. He's blocked me, she realized, voice rising. Try yours. Roan's call met the same fate. He sat on the edge of the bed, the fake ring now feeling heavier than its cheap materials warranted. It's fine, Lakin said, though her tone betrayed her. He's just angry. He'll cool down. You know my brother better than that, Roan replied. Wells doesn't do angry. He does calculated. Lakin stood, wrapping herself in a robe. Well, what's the worst he could do? We didn't break any laws. The condo is in both our names. Our finances are separate except for one joint account for household expenses. She headed for the kitchen, continuing to list reasons they shouldn't worry. Roan followed, his unease growing. He'd known his brother his entire life, had watched Wells methodically build himself from nothing after the system failed them both. Wells didn't act from emotion. He constructed outcomes. In the kitchen, Lakin stopped abruptly. Every cabinet door stood open. Inside, half the contents were missing. What the? She moved to the refrigerator. It too had been partially emptied, all Wells' preferred items gone. He's packed his things, Roan concluded. That's ridiculous. His clothes are still. Lakin rushed back to the bedroom, flinging open the closet door. She froze. We're gone. Half the closet, Wells' half, was empty. Not just clothes, but every personal item meticulously removed, down to the wooden hangers he preferred. Lakin moved through the condo with increasing panic, discovering more evidence of Wells' methodical departure. The home office had been cleared of specific files and electronics. The living room shelves no longer held the books he treasured. Even his toothbrush was gone from the bathroom. How did he do this without waking us? She demanded, returning to the kitchen. We weren't that drunk. Roan didn't answer the question they both knew the answer to, because Wells had always been careful, thorough, and several steps ahead. Lakin grabbed her tablet, fingers tapping furiously. I'm checking our accounts. Roan watched her expression change from determination to disbelief. He's removed me from the joint account, she said. How was that even possible? My name is on it. Wells knows bank managers, investment brokers, probably judges, Roan reminded her. He's been building connections for years. This isn't legal, Lakin insisted, continuing to check other accounts. Her face paled further. My personal account is empty. What? How? I don't know. She slammed the tablet down. Everything's gone. My savings, investment portfolio, everything. Rowan felt sick. This wasn't the brother he remembered. Wells had always been the responsible one, the one who followed rules. My credit cards, Lakin whispered, fumbling with her wallet. She extracted a card and tapped a banking app. Cancelled. All of them. He can't do that, Rowan said, but his conviction wavered. He did. Lakin's voice had taken on a hollow quality. Call Zadie. She'll know where he is. Rowan tried Zadie Moss's number. Like Wells, she'd been part of his life since childhood, first as Wells' friend, later as his business partner. Zadie had always tolerated Rowan's mistakes with the same exasperated affection as his brother. The number you have reached is no longer in service, an automated voice informed him. She changed her number, Rowan reported. This is insane, Lakin muttered, pacing the kitchen. It was just a proposal. People break up all the time. Not like that, Rowan countered. Not on camera. Not with the brother. Lakin shot him a venomous look. Whose side are you on? Yours, he replied automatically. But we need to understand what we're dealing with. She nodded, visibly pulling herself together. Right. Strategy. We need to capitalize on the attention while it's hot. Merritt's video is already at 500,000 views. We can leverage this for your retreat business and my lifestyle brand. Rowan stared at her, thrown by the rapid pivot. That's what you're thinking about right now. What else should I think about? Wells will get over it. In the meantime, we have an opportunity. Something cold settled in Rowan's stomach. For the first time, he considered whether his brother had been right to leave. Lakin grabbed her phone. I'm calling my sponsors. They'll want exclusive interviews about our whirlwind romance. As she dialed, Rowan wandered back to the bedroom, picking up the fake ring and note. He read the message again. You two always loved playing dress-up. Wells knew. Maybe not the full extent of their plan, but enough. Enough to understand that the entire spontaneous proposal had been orchestrated for maximum exposure, a calculated move to boost Lakin's following and provide Rowan with the investor attention his non-existent retreat business needed. What Wells couldn't have known was that the original plan hadn't included Rowan actually being with Lakin. That part had evolved during their planning sessions, stolen kisses turning into something more complicated. From the kitchen, Rowan heard Lakin's voice shift into its professional register as she connected with someone. She was already spinning their story, the unexpected connection, the impossible-to-deny attraction. Rowan sat on the edge of the bed, turning the fake ring over in his fingers. He betrayed his brother, the one person who'd never given up on him, despite ample justification for a woman who was already strategizing how to monetize that betrayal. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. He opened it to find a single sentence. You have 24 hours before the real story breaks. Choose your next move carefully. Attached was a screenshot of messages between Lakin and himself from 2 weeks ago, outlining the proposal plan in explicit detail that Rowan's blood ran cold. He deleted the text immediately, though he knew it was pointless. Wells already had what he needed to eye in the kitchen. Lakin was still talking, her voice rising with excitement as she described potential sponsorship opportunities for their love story. Rowan pocketed the fake ring, a prop in a performance that was rapidly spinning beyond his control. For the first time in his life, he was afraid of his brother, not of physical confrontation, but of the calm, methodical destruction Wells was clearly capable of. By evening, Lakin's initial confidence had crumbled. Her calls to sponsors had gone unanswered. Emails bounced back. Social media messages remained unread. It doesn't make sense, she said, pacing the living room where Rowan sat nursing a bourbon. These people were begging for my endorsement last week. Rowan said nothing. He'd spent the day alternating between checking his phone for further messages from Wells and helping Lakin try to access her accounts, all unsuccessfully. It's like I've been erased, Lakin continued. My bank claims they have no record of my accounts ever existing. That's impossible, Rowan said, though he was no longer certain of anything. Tell that to the manager who just informed me that my signature doesn't match their records. Lakin collapsed onto the sofa. How is Wells doing this? Roan considered showing her the threatening text, but decided against it. He wasn't proud of his decision, but self-preservation had always been his default setting. "We need to think practically," he said instead. "What resources do you have that Wells can't touch?" Lakin frowned. "My sponsor products, I guess. I could sell them. And my followers," she added. "They're still mine. I can use them too." Her words cut off as she checked her phone. "What the hell? What now? My Instagram. It's gone." Her voice rose in panic. "Not just logged out, completely gone. The account doesn't exist anymore." Roan moved to look over her shoulder as she frantically searched for her profile. It had indeed vanished, along with its 100,000 followers. "Try your other platforms," he suggested. Each attempt revealed the same situation. Twitter, TikTok, her lifestyle blog, all erased as if they had never existed. "This isn't happening," Lakin whispered, her composure finally cracking. "He can't do this. Nobody can do this." But Roan was beginning to understand just how thoroughly Wells had prepared. His brother hadn't just walked away, he'd systematically dismantled Lakin's entire constructed reality. "We need to find him," Lakin decided, standing abruptly. "Confront him directly." "And say what?" "Sorry we humiliated you on camera. Please give back the empire you built?" Lakin glared at him. "This isn't funny, Roan. He's destroyed my life's work in less than 24 hours. "Your life's work," Roan repeated, a bitter edge entering his voice. "You mean the brand you built using his connections? The platforms he helped you establish? The followers you gained through his business expertise? Whose side are you on?" Lakin demanded for the second time that day. "I told you yours, but I'm also trying to be realistic. Wells isn't some random ex-boyfriend you can manipulate. He's calculated this down to the minute." Lakin's phone rang, the first incoming call all day. She lunged for it. "Unknown number," she muttered before answering. "Hello? Yes, this is she." Roan watched her expression shift from hopeful to confused to alarmed. "What letter? I haven't sent any. No. There must be a mistake." She listened for several more seconds. "Yes, I understand. Thank you for informing me." She ended the call, looking shell-shocked. "What was that?" Roan asked. "The property management company. They received a notarized letter terminating my residency in this condo. Apparently, I was never on the lease." "That's not possible. You lived here for 2 years. As his guest, legally speaking." Lakin laughed, a hollow sound devoid of humor. "They're sending someone to change the locks tomorrow. I have until noon to remove my belongings." Roan tried to process this latest development. "You can fight this. There are tenant rights." "With what money? What lawyer?" Lakin threw her hands up. "I have nothing, Roan. Everything is gone." The reality of their situation was finally sinking in. Wells hadn't just left. He'd erased every connection, every safety net, every resource they might have leveraged. "We still have each other," Roan offered weakly. Lakin's laugh turned bitter. "Oh, that's comforting. You're as broke as I am." The accusation stung, though it wasn't untrue. Roan had returned to Asheville with barely enough money for a month's rent. His business existed only in conversations and a hastily created website. "We need to start packing," Lakin said, her voice flat. I refused to give him the satisfaction of having my things thrown into the street. As they began the depressing task of gathering her belongings, Roan's phone buzzed again. Another unknown number. "Tick-tock, little brother. 18 hours left." Roan deleted the message immediately, but the damage was done. Wells was watching, counting down to something Roan couldn't predict but instinctively feared. "Who was that?" Lakin asked, noticing his expression. "No one." Roan lied, resuming the packing. By midnight, they had filled Lakin's car with essential items. The question of where to go remained unanswered until Roan reluctantly suggested a budget motel on the outskirts of town, the only option they could afford with the cash they had on hand. As they drove through the darkened streets, Lakin finally broke down, tears streaming silently down her face. "I had everything," she whispered. "I was on the verge of securing a regional lifestyle contract. Another few months, and I would have been financially independent. Now it's all gone." Roan reached across to squeeze her hand, offering comfort he didn't entirely feel. Her words revealed priorities he hadn't fully understood until this moment. Lakin hadn't just betrayed Wells for Roan, she'd done it for the publicity, for the dramatic story that would elevate her brand. The motel was exactly as depressing as expected. One room, a queen bed, faded wallpaper, and the persistent smell of cigarettes despite the no smoking sign. "We'll figure this out tomorrow," Roan said as they settled into the uncomfortable bed. Wells can't have thought of everything, but as sleep eluded him, Roan feared that was exactly what his brother had done. Morning brought no relief. Roan woke to find Lakin already dressed and frantically scrolling through her phone. "It's everywhere," she said without looking up. "What is?" he asked, voice rough with sleep. "Us. The barbecue proposal. But not how we planned." She turned the phone so he could see the screen that a blog post titled "The Queen in Shattered Glass" filled the display. The author, anonymous but writing with intimate knowledge, had published a detailed expose of Lakin's history. Every manipulation, every calculated relationship, every step of her social climbing was laid bare with damning specificity. "Who would?" Roan began, then stopped as realization dawned. "Inez Landry. My former roommate," Lakin confirmed, her voice hollow. "We had a falling out years ago when she accused me of stealing her boyfriend." She laughed bitterly. She was right, of course. Roan took the phone, scrolling through the post. The writer had receipts, screenshots of Lakin's private messages to previous boyfriends, documentation of her methodical approach to relationships as career advancement opportunities. "There's more," Lakin said, taking the phone back and opening another tab. This time, a video filled the screen. Zadie Moss, Wells' best friend, spoke directly to camera with calm precision. "Many have asked for my comment on the viral barbecue proposal involving my friend Wells Camden, his fiancée Lakin Drew, and his brother Roan. Rather than add to the spectacle, I believe the truth should speak for itself." What followed was a montage of clips. Lakin and Roan planning the proposal and what they'd thought was private, discussing how to maximize exposure, laughing about Wells' expected reaction. Roan recognized the footage, immediately security camera videos from the condo office where they'd met to avoid suspicion. "These were private conversations," Lakin whispered. "How did she get this footage?" Roan didn't answer. He was watching himself on screen, his own voice saying things he now wished he could take back. "Wells will be blindsided. That's the money shot we need. He's so predictable. He'll do that stone-faced thing and walk away." Perfect dramatic exit for the video. The compilation ended with Zadie's final comment. "Judge for yourselves. But know this, Wells Camden deserved better." Lakin threw the phone across the room. "That backstabbing witch. She was recording us the whole time." "Actually, I think Wells was," Roan said quietly. "The office where we met belongs to his investment firm. He probably has security cameras throughout the building. And he waited until now to release this." Lakin demanded, "Why not stop the proposal if he knew?" Roan had been wondering the same thing. The answer chilled him, because public humiliation was more effective than private confrontation. Wells had let them execute their plan so he could destroy them more thoroughly. Lakin retrieved her phone, checking other platforms. "It's on everything: Twitter, TikTok, all the local news sites. They're calling me the barbecue bride. What about your backup accounts?" Roan asked. He knew she maintained alternate profiles as a contingency plan. She'd bragged about her foresight during their plotting. "Suspended for suspicious activity," she reported. "Every single one. I can't even create new ones. My email addresses have been blacklisted." Roan checked his own phone, unsurprised to find his meager social presence similarly erased. Wells had been thorough. A notification appeared, another unknown number. "The truth will set you free. Or bury you. 12 hours remaining." He deleted it immediately, but the countdown continued to haunt him. What was coming when the clock hit 0? "We need to leave town," he suggested. "Start fresh somewhere else." Lakin looked at him with contempt. "With what money? What identification? My wallet is missing. So are my passport and birth certificate." "When did that happen?" "I don't know," she snapped. "But they're gone, along with everything else that matters." Roan checked his own wallet. His ID and credit cards remained, but he knew they were worthless now. Wells would have closed any accounts connected to his name. "My sponsors," Lakin said suddenly, reaching for her phone again. "Not all of them follow social media drama. Some might still." She stopped, reading something with increasing despair. What? Roan prompted. Email from Beauty Burst Cosmetics. They're terminating our partnership due to breach of moral clause. Same from Wellness Way and Fit Life. And she stopped, scrolling faster. All of them. Every sponsor I had. Roan watched as the last of her composure crumbled. Lakin had built her identity around her curated image, her influence, her partnerships. Without them, he wasn't sure who she was or if she knew either. It's over, she whispered. No, Roan insisted, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We'll figure something out. We always do. Lakin looked at him with new eyes, calculating, measuring his value in this altered landscape. What exactly do you bring to this situation, Roan? No money, no connections, no skills beyond your face and charm. How exactly are you helping me right now? Her words struck with precision. She was right, of course. Roan had spent his life trading on his appearance and personality, leveraging the opportunities they created without building anything substantial. Before he could respond, Lakin's phone chimed with a notification. Her expression shifted from contempt to confusion. It's from a law firm, she said, requesting my presence for questioning regarding fraudulent credit applications. What fraudulent applications? I don't know, she replied, but her eyes darted away too quickly. It must be another of Wells' tricks. But Roan had caught the flash of recognition in her expression. What did you do, Lakin? She remained silent, still reading the email. What did you do to my brother? Roan pressed, a sick feeling growing in his stomach. Nothing that can be proven, she finally answered. Just some credit accounts to build my business. His credit score was perfect. It helped me secure better terms. You used his name without permission. He would have said no, she replied, as if that justified the action. Besides, I was making the payments. It wasn't hurting him. Roan stared at her, seeing clearly for the first time the person he'd chosen over his brother. How many accounts? 3 or 4, she admitted, then amended under his continued stare. Maybe 7. Did you forge his signature? Her silence was answer enough. Jesus, Lakin. That's fraud. Wells could have you arrested. He wouldn't dare, she snapped. The publicity would damage his precious reputation. But even as she said it, Roan could tell she didn't believe her own words. Wells had already demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice privacy for justice. We should talk to the lawyers, Roan suggested. Explain the situation. Maybe they'll. No, Lakin cut him off. I'm not admitting to anything. It's my word against whatever evidence he claims to have. Something in her resolute denial convinced Roan that Wells had exactly the evidence needed. His brother had always been methodical about documentation. Another text arrived on Roan's phone, 6 hours left. Choose wisely. This time, he didn't delete it immediately. Instead, he considered his options, none of which seemed promising. Stay with Lakin and face whatever Wells had planned, or I need some air, Roan said, grabbing his jacket. And food. I'll pick up something for both of us. Lakin barely acknowledged him, too absorbed in her collapsing digital presence to notice his hesitation at the door. Outside, Roan walked to the corner of the motel property, where he finally did what he should have done yesterday. He called his brother. The call connected on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd reach out, Wells said, his voice calm. 5 hours and 43 minutes before the deadline. Cutting it close, as usual. What do you want from me? Roan asked. Nothing, Wells replied. Not anymore. The finality in those 2 words hit Roan harder than any accusation. Wells' eye. Save it, his brother interrupted. I'm not interested in apologies or explanations. I'm calling to give you one chance, not because you deserve it, but because despite everything, you're still my brother. Roan waited, heart pounding. Leave her, Wells continued. Walk away now, before the clock runs out. What happens next will destroy her completely, but you don't have to go down with that ship. What are you planning? Roan asked. Justice, Wells replied simply. The consequences of her actions, all of them, not just with you. The credit fraud, among other things, Wells confirmed. She's been busy. Roan closed his eyes, weighing his limited options. And if I walk away, you start over. Somewhere else, without my help but also without my hindrance. That's it. Just leave town. With nothing from me. Wells clarified. No bailouts, no jobs, no connections. You're on your own, permanently this time. The offer was clear. Freedom for whatever storm was coming, but also freedom from the safety net Wells had always provided. Complete independence, terrifying and necessary. 5 hours, 31 minutes, Wells reminded him. Your choice. The call ended, leaving Roan standing in the parking lot of a cheap motel, facing the most consequential decision of his life. Lakin spent the afternoon in increasingly desperate damage control attempts. Each social media platform where she created new accounts suspended them within minutes. Email services blocked her. Even attempts to comment on news stories about herself were filtered out. It's like I've been deleted from the internet, she told Roan when he returned with sandwiches neither of them had the appetite to eat. Roan watched her frantic efforts with detachment, his brother's deadline weighing on his mind. For hours remained. Maybe we should separate for a while, he suggested carefully. Give things time to cool down. Lakin looked up sharply. You're leaving me? Now. Not leaving, he backpedaled. Just thinking strategically. Wells is targeting us as a unit. If we split up, maybe what? He'll forgive you because you're blood. Lakin laughed bitterly. You betrayed him more than I did. You're his brother. The truth of her words stung, but Roan pressed on. I'm just saying we might have better chances apart than together. Lakin studied him with new suspicion. You talked to him, didn't you? What? No, I just... Don't lie to me, Roan. She stood, advancing on him. What did he offer you? A way back into his good graces? Money. Nothing, Roan insisted. He offered me nothing. It wasn't entirely a lie. Wells had indeed offered nothing, no help, no resources, just the absence of active destruction. Lakin seemed about to pursue the point when her phone rang. She checked the number, her expression shifting to hope. It's Beauty Burst, she said before answering. This is Lakin. Roan watched as she paced, her professional voice firmly in place as she attempted to salvage the relationship. Minutes passed. Her response is becoming increasingly desperate. I understand your concerns, but there's more to the story. No, those videos don't show the full picture. A temporary setback, absolutely. Of course I value our partnership. Finally, she stopped pacing, listening silently for a long moment before responding with a tight, I understand. Thank you for calling. She ended the call and sank onto the bed. They're not just canceling our contract, she said, voice hollow. They're demanding repayment of the last quarter's advance. $15,000 I've already spent. Can they do that? Moral clause, Lakin replied, which apparently I violated by bringing negative publicity to the brand through personal conduct. They're all using the same language, almost word for word. Roan didn't point out the obvious, that Wells had likely provided them with the exact legal phrasing needed. How much do you owe in total? He asked instead. Lakin laughed a harsh, broken sound. With all the brands? Close to 100,000. Money I don't have and can't get. 3 hours remained on Wells' deadline. Roan felt the pressure building, the clock ticking toward whatever final blow his brother had planned. I need to make some calls, he said, moving toward the door again. To who? Lakin demanded. All our contacts have abandoned us. There's no one left. I'll figure something out, Roan insisted, already halfway outside. Once alone in the parking lot, he made his decision. In the end, it wasn't even difficult. Wells was right, Lakin had used them both, and while Roan was guilty of betrayal, he wasn't willing to go down with her sinking ship. He returned to the room, where Lakin was attempting to call another sponsor. I'm leaving, he announced without preamble. She lowered the phone slowly. What? This isn't working. We're not working. I'm going. Because things got difficult? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The first sign of trouble, and you bail? This is more than trouble, Lakin. This is complete destruction. Wells isn't going to stop until he's taken everything. So you're giving him what he wants. She stood, approaching him with calculated steps. After everything we planned, everything we sacrificed, what exactly did you sacrifice? Roan countered. You were using him from the beginning. Using me too, for publicity. Don't pretend you didn't know what this was, she snapped. You were happy enough to play along when it benefited you. She wasn't wrong. Roan had entered their arrangement with open eyes, willing to betray his brother for opportunity and attraction. The realization brought no comfort. "I'm sorry," he said, meaning it, "but I can't stay." Lakin's expression hardened. "Fine, go, but don't expect a warm welcome when I rebuild from this." "And I will rebuild. I hope you do," Roan replied, though he doubted it was possible. Not after whatever Wells had planned for the deadline. He gathered his few possessions, painfully aware of how little he'd accumulated in his nomadic life. One bag that was all he had to show for 32 years of existence. "Aita the door," he paused. "For what it's worth, I did care about you." "Not enough," Lakin replied coldly. "Not when it mattered." Roan nodded, accepting the accusation. "Goodbye, Lakin." He closed the door on her silent glare, feeling neither relief nor regret, just the hollow certainty that he was making the least worst choice available, in the parking lot. He sent a final text to the number Wells had been using. "I'm out. On my own, as agreed." The response came immediately. "Wise choice. Bus terminal. Ticket to Charlotte waiting under your name." One way. Roan pocketed his phone and began walking. Behind him, in the motel room, Lakin continued her desperate attempts to salvage what remained of her reputation, unaware that the worst was yet to come. 2 hours until Wells' deadline. Alone in the motel room, Lakin's controlled facade finally crumbled completely. She hurled her phone against the wall, watching with detached satisfaction as the screen shattered a physical manifestation of her collapsing life. "Coward," she muttered, thinking of Roan's retreating back. All men were the same, useful until they weren't, loyal until tested. She retrieved her damaged phone, relieved to find it still functioning. The cracked screen seemed appropriate now, matching her fractured reality. That a notification appeared, another comment on a viral video of her barbecue proposal. Despite her better judgment, she opened it. "Gold digger got what she deserved," read the top comment, with hundreds of likes supporting the sentiment. Lakin scrolled, each comment more vicious than the last. Her carefully constructed public image lay in ruins, replaced by a caricature she barely recognized. The barbecue bride, a calculating manipulator who'd staged a public betrayal for attention. What infuriated her most was how close to the truth it was. Not entirely accurate, she had developed genuine feelings for Roan during their planning, but close enough that she couldn't convincingly deny the core accusation. Her phone buzzed with an email notification. Another sponsor, terminating their relationship. She deleted it without reading the details. The walls of the small motel room seemed to close in. Lakin paced, her breathing becoming shallow as anxiety tightened its grip. She'd experienced panic attacks before, but always managed them privately, away from the perfect image she presented to the world. Now, alone with her disintegrating reality, the panic overwhelmed her. Her heart raced, palms sweating as she struggled to control her breathing. The sensation of impending doom was both psychological and literal. Wells' deadline loomed just hours away. What was coming? What final humiliation had he planned? Lakin forced herself to the bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. The stranger in the mirror startled her, pale, eyes red-rimmed. The careful makeup that had been her armor now smudged and defeated. She reached for the prescription bottle in her toiletry bag. The anti-anxiety medication she rarely needed but always carried, part of the private reality she'd kept hidden from her followers. 2 pills. A glass of water. Deep breaths as she waited for the chemical calm to assert itself. Back in the bedroom, she picked up her cracked phone again, unable to resist the self-destructive urge to check the comments. Dozens more had appeared, each adding to the public pillorying. This is what happens when you fake your whole life for followers. Anyone have Wells' number? That man deserves a medal for walking away so calmly. That barbecue bride needs to be canceled permanently. Lakin found herself responding before she could stop herself, defending her actions, explaining her side. Each response drew more attacks, more vitriol. An hour passed in this digital self-flagellation. The medication dulled the sharpest edges of her anxiety, but couldn't touch the creeping dread as Wells' deadline drew closer. Her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. For a moment, she hoped it was Roan, returning to apologize. Instead, she found a single line. 1 hour remaining. I suggest you prepare yourself. Wells. It had to be. The calm, measured threat was unmistakably his style. Lakin threw the phone down, resumed pacing. What could be worse than what had already happened? Her reputation destroyed, finances ruined, relationship imploded, career ended. Unless a new fear took hold. The credit accounts she'd opened in Wells' name. The documents she'd forged. The legal line she'd crossed believing her charm and his love would prevent any consequences. She lunged for her laptop, the one possession Wells hadn't managed to compromise. With trembling fingers, she searched for criminal penalties for identity theft and credit fraud in North Carolina. The results confirmed her worst fears. Up to 5 years imprisonment. Felony charges. Permanent criminal record. He wouldn't, she whispered to the empty room. Not Wells. He's too private, too concerned with appearances. But the Wells she thought she knew had disappeared the moment she knelt before his brother. The man who had methodically dismantled her life in less than 48 hours was a stranger with unfamiliar capabilities. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, but not a text or video call request. Lakin hesitated, then accepted. Inez Landry's face appeared on the cracked screen. Hello, Lakin, her former friend said, expression neutral. Been a while. What do you want? Lakin asked, voice hoarse. To offer you a choice. Inez adjusted her glasses, the same scholarly look she'd maintained since college, immune to Lakin's attempts to make over her personal brand. A choice about what? About what happens when the clock runs out. Inez replied calmly. Wells asked me to contact you. So this was at the final play. Lakin straightened her shoulders, summoning the last of her dignity. Whatever he's planning, I can handle it. Inez's laugh held no humor. Always so confident. Even now, just tell me what he wants, Lakin snapped. A public confession, Inez said simply. Posted to Merritt Knox's blog. The full truth, how you planned the proposal for publicity, how you used both Cameron brothers, all of it. And if I refuse, then the evidence of your financial fraud goes to the district attorney instead of being buried forever. Your choice. Lakin stared at the screen, weighing her options. Public humiliation versus potential criminal charges. The destruction of her remaining dignity versus the destruction of her freedom. How do I know he'll keep his word? She asked finally. Because unlike you, Wells values integrity, Inez replied coolly. The confession buys his silence on the legal issues. Permanently. You have 30 minutes to decide. The call ended, leaving Lakin alone with an impossible choice. Either way, her carefully constructed life was over. The only question was how completely she would lose. 28 minutes later, Lakin sat before her laptop, Merritt Knox's blog submission form open on the screen. She'd made her decision, the only one possible under the circumstances. The confession she drafted was carefully worded, admitting to the planned betrayal while attempting to preserve some dignity. She maintained that real feelings had developed for Roan, that not everything had been calculated. As her finger hovered over the submit button, her phone buzzed with a final message. Time's up. Your decision? Lakin took a deep breath and hit submit. The post would go live after Merritt's approval, another humiliation. Having her confession filtered through the woman whose event she'd hijacked. Confession submitted, she texted back. The response was immediate and chilling. Too late. Check your email. With growing dread, Lakin. With growing dread, Lakin opened her inbox to find a message from Wells' lawyer. Attached were documents detailing her financial fraud, correspondence with the district attorney's office, and a court date for her arraignment 2 weeks from today. No, she whispered, scrolling frantically through the legal paperwork. We had a deal. Her phone rang Inez again. Lakin answered, fury overtaking fear. You lied to me. He's pressing charges anyway. I didn't lie. Inez replied calmly. I delivered his message. But you missed the deadline, Lakin. By exactly 3 minutes. 3 minutes? That's insane. No one is that precise. Wells Camden is, Inez countered. You knew that about him. Precision. Attention to detail. Following through on exactly what he says he'll do. The truth of this statement hit Lakin with crushing force. Wells had always been meticulously precise in his work, his schedules, his promises. She had counted on his flexibility, his forgiveness, his love allowing her to bend his rigid nature. She had been catastrophically wrong. The legal proceedings will be public record, Inez continued. And your confession will still be published. Merritt is quite excited about the traffic it will bring. So you get both outcomes, criminal charges and public humiliation. Congratulations. The call ended. Lakin sat motionless, staring at the email, detailing her impending legal destruction. 3 minutes. Her life changed irrevocably because of 3 minutes. Or perhaps, more accurately, because of a decision made months ago to use Wells Camden as a stepping stone rather than a partner. To see his stability as a resource to be exploited rather than a gift to be treasured. Too late, Lakin understood what she had discarded. And exactly who she had underestimated. 3 months later, Wells Camden stood at the back of Courtroom B in the Buncombe County Courthouse, watching as Lakin Drew's lawsuit against him was systematically dismantled. Your Honor, as we've demonstrated, Ms. Drew was never legally added to the property deed, his attorney explained. Mr. Camden consulted with legal counsel before their engagement to ensure his assets remained protected. The judge, a woman in her 60s with shrewd eyes and thinning patience, nodded. And the joint account Ms. Drew claims entitled her to half its contents. Account records show Mr. Camden was the sole depositor for the 3 years of its existence. Ms. Drew made exactly 0 contributions. Wells maintained his neutral expression as Lakin turned in her seat, scanning the courtroom until she spotted him. Her glare held equal parts hatred and desperation. 3 months had transformed her, the designer clothes replaced by a modest department store suit, the perfect hair now dull and hastily styled, the confident posture collapsed into defeated tension. Their eyes met briefly before Wells looked away, focusing instead on the proceedings. He wasn't here for confrontation or satisfaction, only completion. Ms. Drew, the judge addressed Lakin directly. You've alleged emotional distress and request compensation of $500,000. On what grounds do you justify this amount? Lakin's attorney, clearly uncomfortable and likely working on a contingency basis, cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client suffered significant career damage and psychological trauma following Mr. Camden's systematic efforts to destroy her online presence and business relationships. Wells' attorney rose again. If I may, Your Honor, Ms. Drew's career damage resulted directly from her own recorded actions planning and executing a public betrayal of my client for the explicit purpose of gaining social media attention. We have submitted the video evidence demonstrating this premeditation. The judge reviewed the file before her, expression growing increasingly stern. I've seen the videos, counselor. Frankly, they don't paint your client in a sympathetic light. Lakin whispered urgently to her attorney, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the conversation continued. Your Honor, Lakin's attorney finally said, regardless of the events that precipitated their separation, Mr. Camden took extraordinary measures to essentially erase my client from the digital landscape, causing demonstrable financial harm. Did your client have legal ownership of these accounts? The judge asked. Well, technically, yes or no, counselor. The accounts were created under service agreements that permitted termination at the platform's discretion. He admitted reluctantly. The judge nodded. And did Mr. Camden personally contact these platforms to request termination? Wells' attorney interjected. There is 0 evidence that my client directly contacted any social media company. Ms. Drew's accounts were suspended due to community guideline violations, specifically platform manipulation and inauthentic behavior. We've provided the termination notices. The judge reviewed the documents again before looking directly at Lakin. Ms. Drew, I find no legal basis for your claims. Mr. Camden appears to have protected his assets through entirely legal means. The loss of your social media presence resulted from your violation of platform policies. She turned to Wells' attorney. Now, regarding the countersuit for fraudulent credit applications, we're prepared to present evidence that Ms. Drew opened 7 credit accounts using Mr. Camden's personal information without his knowledge or consent, resulting in approximately $112,000 of unauthorized debt. Wells watched as Lakin's attorney placed a restraining hand on her arm, preventing her from standing. Their whispered conversation appeared heated. Finally, Lakin's attorney addressed the court. "Your Honor, in light of the evidence presented, my client wishes to withdraw her lawsuit against Mr. Camden." Noted, the judge replied. "In the countersuit, we maintain our position," Wells' attorney stated firmly. "Mr. Camden seeks full restitution of the fraudulently obtained funds, plus legal fees and damages." The proceedings continued for another hour, each piece of evidence further cementing Lakin's legal defeat. Wells observed it all with detached calm, feeling neither victory nor vindication, only the completion of necessary business. When the judge finally ruled, her decision was decisive. Case dismissed against Wells. Countersuit upheld with full damages awarded, plus legal fees. "Ms. Drew," the judge concluded, "you are ordered to repay $112,000 in fraudulently obtained funds, plus $43,000 in legal fees and damages. Given your current financial situation, the court recommends you consult with a bankruptcy attorney immediately." As the courtroom began to empty, Wells remained in his seat, watching as Lakin's attorney quickly gathered his materials and departed, likely recognizing he would never see payment for his services. Lakin sat alone at the plaintiff's table, staring straight ahead. When she finally stood and turned, her eyes found Wells again. This time, he didn't look away. She approached slowly, composure barely maintained. "Are you satisfied?" she asked, voice low but steady. This wasn't about satisfaction, Wells replied simply. "What was it about, then? Punishment? Revenge? Consequences?" he corrected. "Actions have them." Lakin laughed bitterly. "You've destroyed everything I built." "You built it on lies," Wells countered, standing to face her properly. "On using people, on manipulation. And you're so perfect," she challenged. "You didn't exactly fight fair either." "I didn't start the fight," Wells said. "I just finished it." They stood in silence, the gulf between them inhabited by ghosts of what might have been a partnership, a marriage, a future together. "I did love you," Lakin finally said. "In my way." Wells studied her face, searching for truth in a person who had made deception an art form. "Your way wasn't enough." "And now?" she asked. "Bankruptcy? Criminal charges? Is that justice in your mind?" "The criminal charges were dropped when you confessed," Wells reminded her. "That was our agreement." 3 minutes late, she said bitterly. 3 minutes can change everything, he agreed. "Like the 3 minutes it took you to decide my brother was worth betraying me for." Lakin flinched, the first genuine reaction he'd seen from her in months. "What happens now?" "You rebuild," Wells said simply. "Without my name, my resources, or my concern." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I can't? I think you'll try," he replied honestly. "But foundations matter, Lakin. You can't build something lasting on manipulation and lies." "Watch me," she whispered, defiance flickering in her eyes. Wells nodded once, acknowledging her challenge without accepting it. Then he turned and walked away, leaving Lakin Drew standing alone in the empty courtroom, broke, defeated, but evidently not broken. Outside, Zadie waited by his car, her expression questioning. "How was it necessary?" Wells replied, unlocking the vehicle. "Not pleasant." "Nothing about this has been pleasant," she agreed, sliding into the passenger seat. "Ready for phase 2? Wells started the engine, considering her question. The legal battle was concluded, justice served through proper channels. What remained was personal recovery, rebuilding his own foundation. "Yes," he finally said. "I think I am." 2 weeks after the courthouse confrontation, Lakin sat in her car, now her primary residence, scrolling through job listings on a library computer. Her bankruptcy filing was in process, her apartment long gone, her possessions reduced to what fit in the trunk and back seat. The fall from influencer to destitution had been swift and complete. Even her parents, estranged for years but aware of her public downfall, had refused contact when she'd finally swallowed her pride and reached out. Her phone, a prepaid model purchased with cash, chimed with a text message. Her heart jumped. Only one person still contacted her consistently. Opening the message, she found a single line from Roan. "You made me think I was the chosen one. Turns out I was the weapon." Lakin stared at the screen, confusion giving way to understanding. After 3 months of sporadic communication, promises of reuniting when things settled, plans for rebuilding together, Roan was cutting ties. She typed quickly. "What are you saying?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. "Finally, I'm saying goodbye, Lakin. This isn't working. It never was." Anger flared, hot and immediate. "You're abandoning me now? After everything I've lost?" His response was delayed, but devastating when it came. "What exactly would I be staying for? The manipulation? The constant blame? You used me to hurt Wells, then used me as emotional support while you try to sue him. I'm done being used." That Lakin's hands shook as she typed. "We had a connection. Real feelings. Don't pretend otherwise. Maybe at some point. But not anymore. Good luck with everything." The finality of his message hit her like a physical blow. Roan, her last connection, her backup plan, her emotional safety net, was severing ties with the same casual ease he approached everything. "Where are you?" she demanded. "We should talk about this in person." No response. "Roan? Nothing. At least tell me where you are." The silence stretched, becoming its own answer. Wherever Roan Camden was, he had moved beyond her reach, just like his brother. Lakin threw the phone onto the passenger seat, fighting back tears of frustration. How had everything collapsed so completely? 3 months ago, she'd been on the verge of regional influencer status, living in a luxury condo, engaged to a successful investment manager, with sponsorship deals worth thousands. Now she slept in her car, showered at the gym, and subsisted on fast food while applying for retail jobs under her legal name Lauren Daniels, identity she'd abandoned years ago in favor of the more distinctive Lakin Drew. Her phone chimed again. She snatched it up, hoping Roan had reconsidered. Instead, she found a notification from a gossip blog she still monitored, Camden Brothers. Where are they now? Exclusive update on barbecue bride triangle. With masochistic compulsion, Lakin opened the link. The article featured a recent photo of Wells in a tailored suit, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him, standing beside Zadie Moss at some business function. The caption identified him as rising investment star and regional philanthropist Wells Camden. The article mentioned his graceful recovery from public betrayal and inspiring resilience, painting him as the sympathetic figure in their saga. His business was thriving, his reputation enhanced rather than damaged by his dignified response to humiliation. And Roan? A single line mentioned he had reportedly begun a legitimate wellness business in the Pacific Northwest, with no further details. Both Camden brothers had landed on their feet, rebuilding while she remained trapped in the wreckage of what they had once been together. The unfairness of it burned through her, hot and clarifying. They had moved on while she remained defined by a single event, reduced to the barbecue bride in public memory. Lakin started her car, the last possession of value she owned, and one that would soon be repossessed if she couldn't find employment. As she pulled out of the library parking lot, she made a decision. Asheville had nothing left for her. It was time to start over somewhere new, somewhere her reputation hadn't preceded her. She drove east toward the coast, with no destination beyond away. Her phone remained silent on the seat beside her, Roan's final message still displayed on the screen. "You made me think I was the chosen one. Turns out I was the weapon." The truth of his words followed her down the highway, an unwelcome companion on her journey to nowhere. 6 months after the courthouse confrontation, Wells stood on a private balcony overlooking the Aegean Sea. Santorini stretched before him, white buildings gleaming against the volcanic landscape, blue domes capturing the evening sky's color. The vineyard villa had been an investment rather than an indulgence. Property in Santorini held its value exceptionally well. But Wells couldn't deny the personal satisfaction the location provided. This had been his planned honeymoon destination with Lakin, a dream she'd carelessly shared with his brother during their betrayal planning. Now it was his alone, or rather his and Zadie's, as business partners in their expanding investment portfolio, that he swirled the local wine in his glass, appreciating its complex notes. The sunset painted the white buildings in warm gold tones, creating the postcard-perfect view the island was famous for. The terrace door opened behind him. "There you are," Zadie said, joining him at the railing. "Hiding from our investors?" "Strategic retreat," Wells corrected with a small smile. "They're discussing football. I had nothing to contribute." Zadie laughed, helping herself to wine from the bottle on the small table between their chairs. The acquisition meeting went well. They're impressed with the portfolio expansion. "Good." Wells returned to his seat, gesturing for her to join him. "The local vineyards have significant growth potential with proper management." "Always thinking about the investment angle," Zadie teased, though her tone was affectionate rather than critical. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower over the caldera. This was what Wells appreciated most about their partnership, the ability to exist together without performing, without filling every moment with words. "I heard from Roan yesterday," Zadie mentioned casually, watching for his reaction. Wells kept his expression neutral. "How is he?" "Better than expected. His wellness retreat in Oregon is gaining traction legitimately this time, with actual investors and business licensing." "Good for him," Wells said, meaning it despite everything. Roan was still his brother, though their relationship had been fundamentally altered by betrayal. "He asked about you," Zadie continued, "whether you might consider reconnecting eventually." Wells considered the question, looking out over the darkening sea. "Eventually," he finally said. "Not now." Zadie nodded, understanding without requiring explanation. That was another quality he valued in her, respect for emotional boundaries. "What about Lakin?" she asked after another comfortable silence. "Any updates?" "Nothing recent," Wells replied. "Last I heard, she'd moved to Virginia. Retail job, apartment with roommates. Starting over. Does that satisfy you?" Zadie's question held no judgment, only curiosity. Wells thought carefully before answering. It wasn't about satisfaction. It was about consequences. "Fair enough." Zadie raised her glass. "To surviving the fire, then building an empire with the ashes." The toast, their private acknowledgement of what they'd overcome together, brought a genuine smile to Wells' face. He clinked his glass against hers. "To the ashes," he agreed. Their conversation drifted to business matters, the third vineyard they were considering acquiring, expansion possibilities in neighboring islands, investment opportunities in sustainable tourism. Night settled fully over Santorini. Wells found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. The public betrayal that had initially seemed like an ending had instead forced a new beginning, one with clearer boundaries, more authentic relationships, and surprisingly, greater success. "Oh, I almost forgot," Zadie said, reaching in her bag. "Your manuscript came back from the editor." She handed him a thick envelope containing the document he'd been working on for months. The last toast was printed on the cover page, with his name below. "Final edits," she explained. "Publication date still set for spring." Wells ran his hand over the manuscript, part memoir, part business philosophy, exploring how personal betrayal had forced professional innovation. "Are you sure about publishing this?" Zadie asked. "It's more personal than your usual investments." "I'm sure," Wells replied. "Some stories need to be told, not for revenge or public validation, but because sharing the experience might help others rebuild after betrayal." The book wasn't about Lakin specifically. She appeared only as an unnamed figure whose actions catalyzed transformation. "Well, I think it's brilliant," Zadie declared. "Inspiring without being preachy. Honest without being vindictive." Wells set the manuscript on the table between them, making a mental note to review the edits tomorrow. Tonight was for appreciation of the view, the wine, the company, and the peace he'd fought to reclaim. "Another glass?" he offered, reaching for the bottle. Zadie smiled, holding out her empty glass. "Always." Lakin Drew, now using her birth name, Lauren Daniels, again pulled into the gas station at the edge of Richmond, Virginia. Her 12-hour shift at the department store had left her exhausted, feet aching from standing all day in the shoe department. 8 months had passed since her bankruptcy filing, 10 since the BBQ betrayal that had defined her downfall. She was starting over, literally from nothing, minimum wage job, shared apartment with 2 roommates who knew nothing of her past, No social media presence beyond a private Facebook account used solely for job applications. The humility of it all still stung. She'd been so close to success, real success, not just the curated image of it before everything collapsed. Regional influencer contracts, lifestyle brand partnerships, a platform that was growing exponentially. All gone now, replaced by employee discounts and break-room gossip. Lake and Lauren swiped her debit card at the pump, grateful when it was approved. Financial stability remained elusive, but at least she could afford gas again. As she filled her tank, a group of teenagers emerged from the convenience store, laughing and filming each other with their phones. Instinctively, Lakin turned away, a habit developed over months of avoiding being recognized, but it was too late. One of the teens, a girl of perhaps 16, had spotted her. "Wait," the girl said, staring openly. "Aren't you the barbecue bride?" Lakin froze, pump still in hand. She considered denial, but instead gave a small nod. What was the point of lying? Her face had been viewed millions of times. "Oh my God," the girl exclaimed, already raising her phone. "It's really her. At my gas station." The other teens gathered, phones out, recording her mundane act of pumping gas like it was a celebrity sighting. Lakin kept her head down, face burning with humiliation. "What happened to you?" one boy asked. "You're like working at a gas station now." "I don't work here," Lakin corrected quietly. "I'm just getting gas." "Where's the brother?" another teen asked. "The one you proposed to?" Lakin replaced the pump, screwed her gas cap back on. "I need to go." "Wait, can we get a selfie?" the first girl asked, already positioning herself beside Lakin's car. "No, thank you." Lakin opened her driver's side door, desperate to escape. "Just one," the girl insisted. "No one's going to believe we saw you otherwise." Without waiting for permission, the teens crowded around Lakin, taking photos and video despite her obvious discomfort. She ducked in her car, started the engine, and pulled away as quickly as safety allowed. In her rearview mirror, she could see them still filming, laughing, likely already uploading the encounter to whatever platforms dominated teen social media these days. By the time Lakin reached her apartment, the incident had been posted, shared, and begun circulating. Her phone, the same prepaid model she'd purchased months ago, pinged with a notification from an old friend who still occasionally checked, "Did I ask this you?" The message contained a link to a TikTok video titled "From Viral Queen to Gas Station Worker: The Fall of Lakin Drew." Already over 50,000 views in less than an hour. Lakin closed the app without responding, too drained to engage with yet another round of public humiliation. Would it ever end? Would she always be defined by that single misguided decision? Inside her small apartment, she found her roommates watching TV in the shared living room. They knew nothing of her past. She'd been careful about that, using her legal name and providing minimal background information when she'd answered their room-for-rent advertisement. "Hey, Lauren," one called as she passed. "Rough day." "The usual," Lakin replied, forcing a smile. "I'm going to shower and crash." In the privacy of her bedroom, the smallest in the apartment, but the only one she could afford, Lakin finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day's humiliation. 10 months later, and she was still the barbecue bride, still defined by her worst decision, still unable to escape the narrative that had consumed her former identity. She pulled out her laptop, a basic model purchased with her first paycheck, and hesitated before opening a browser window. Against her better judgment, she searched her own name. The teen's video was indeed trending, already picked up by several gossip sites. Alongside it were older stories: her bankruptcy, her failed lawsuit against Wells, her disappearance from social media. And there, in the related section, was a new headline that made her heart stop. Wells Camden's The Last Toast tops NYT bestseller list. Memoir of recovery from public betrayal resonates with readers. The accompanying photo showed Wells at a book signing, looking confident and successful. Beside him stood Zadie Moss, her hand resting comfortably on his shoulder in a gesture that suggested more than business partnership. Lakin clicked the article, masochistic curiosity overriding self-preservation. The book was described as an honest exploration of betrayal, resilience, and rebuilding that never names names but tells a compelling story of personal and professional recovery. A publishing success, a bestseller. Wells Camden had transformed their relationship's destruction into literary triumph, while she pumped gas for teenagers to mock on social media. Lakin closed the laptop abruptly, unable to bear more. The ultimate indignity wasn't just surviving while she struggled, it was thriving, creating meaning and success from the very event that had destroyed her. She lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling of her rented room. 10 months ago, she'd been planning sponsorship deals and content strategies. Now she was planning how to afford new work shoes on a retail salary. The universe, it seemed, had a particularly vicious sense of irony. Her phone buzzed again, another notification about the gas station video, now approaching 100,000 views. Lakin turned the device off completely. Tonight, at least, she would disconnect from the endless reminders of her fall. Tomorrow she would face another shift at the department store, another day of rebuilding from nothing, another step in the long journey back from being the barbecue bride. 18 months after the barbecue proposal, Wells Camden stood backstage at a TEDx event in Seattle, reviewing his notes one final time. The invitation to speak had come after his book's unexpected success. The Last Toast had remained on bestseller lists for 26 weeks, connecting with readers far beyond its intended business audience. 5 minutes, Mr. Camden, a stage manager informed him. Wells nodded, tucking his note cards away. He wouldn't need them. This speech, unlike investment presentations or business lectures, came from a place of absolute authenticity. He had lived every word. From the stage, he could hear the host introducing him, whose journey from public betrayal to personal reinvention has inspired thousands through his best-selling memoir. As applause signaled his cue, Wells straightened his tie and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, the audience a sea of attentive faces. He approached the center mark, took a deliberate breath, and began. 18 months ago, I stood silently at a social gathering as my fiancée proposed to my brother on camera. He let the statement hang in the air, noting the audience's sudden stillness. That moment, which later went viral as the barbecue proposal, was designed to humiliate me publicly for social media attention. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Most had heard of the incident or read his book, but hearing him state it so directly had impact. I walked away without saying a word, Wells continued, and that silence became my greatest strength. For the next 18 minutes, Wells shared his journey, not focusing on the betrayal itself, but on the reconstruction that followed. How public humiliation had forced him to rebuild with intention rather than habit. How losing what he thought he wanted had created space for what he actually needed. When your life collapses, he told the audience, you can salvage 2 things from the wreckage: the lessons and yourself. Everything else can be rebuilt better than before. He spoke about boundaries without bitterness, accountability without anger, success without spite. Throughout, he never named Lakin or Roan directly. They remained my former fiancé and my brother, their identities irrelevant to the principles he was sharing. As he approached his conclusion, Wells paused, making eye contact with individual audience members. The question I'm asked most frequently is whether I've forgiven them, he said. It's a complicated question because forgiveness itself is complicated. What I can tell you is this: I no longer carry anger. I no longer seek justice. I no longer define myself by what was done to me. Another pause, letting the words resonate. True power isn't found in revenge, though revenge is tempting. It's found in reconstruction and building something so solid that no betrayal can ever destroy you completely again. Wells moved toward his final point, voice strengthening with conviction. They tried to write my ending. I rewrote the whole damn book. He smiled slightly, acknowledging the literal truth of the statement as well as its metaphorical meaning. And in doing so, I discovered that some endings are actually perfect beginnings. The applause began before he'd finished his final sentence, rising to a standing ovation as he thanked the audience and exited the stage. Backstage, the event coordinator was already approaching with congratulations, but Wells moved past him to where Zadie waited. How was it? He asked, though her beaming expression already provided the answer. Perfect, she replied, embracing him briefly. Authentic without being vindictive. Powerful without being bitter. Wells nodded, accepting the assessment from the person whose opinion mattered most to him. Their relationship had evolved over the past year, friendship deepening into something more meaningful, a partnership based on mutual respect rather than convenience or calculation. "Ready for the meet and greet?" the coordinator asked, gesturing toward a room where attendees waited to speak with presenters. "Absolutely," Wells agreed. As they followed the coordinator, Zadie slipped her hand into his. "How does it feel, putting the final punctuation mark on that chapter?" Wells considered the question carefully. "Liberating," he finally said. "Like setting down a weight I didn't realize I was still carrying." For 90 minutes, Wells spoke with attendees, signing books, answering questions, listening to stories of others who had rebuilt after betrayal. Throughout, he maintained the balance he'd worked to achieve, compassionate without being naive, guarded without being closed. Later, in their hotel suite, Wells stood at the window overlooking Seattle's skyline. 18 months had transformed his life in ways he couldn't have imagined that day at Merritt Knox's barbecue. Loss had become opportunity. Betrayal had become wisdom. Pain had become purpose. "Penny for your thoughts," Zadie said, joining him at the window. "Just reflecting," he replied, putting an arm around her shoulders. "On endings and beginnings." "And which is this?" she asked, leaning into him. Wells smiled, genuine and unguarded in a way he hadn't been before everything collapsed and was rebuilt stronger. "Definitely a beginning." 5 years after the barbecue proposal, Wells Camden stood in the central building of his third vineyard property, watching his staff prepared for a private event. Ashes and Vine had grown from a single investment property in Santorini to a boutique collection of vineyards across 3 countries. His best-selling book had led to speaking engagements, consulting opportunities, and eventually a reputation as an authority on resilience in business and personal life. The viral video that had once threatened to define him was now merely a footnote in his biography, the catalyst for a more authentic life. Zadie emerged from the office, clipboard in hand. Their partnership had flourished in every sense: business, creative, and personal. Their wedding 2 years ago had been private, attended only by close friends and Wells' brother Roan, with whom he had cautiously rebuilt a relationship. "The investors are arriving in 20 minutes, she informed him. "The 2028 vintage is ready for tasting." Wells nodded, adjusting a place setting at the central table. "And the special bottle?" Zadie smiled. "Right here." She produced an elegant bottle with a custom label, the Last Toast 5th Anniversary Edition. It had become tradition each year. They created a limited vintage commemorating the event that had changed everything, not with bitterness or resentment, but with recognition that sometimes destruction creates space for something better to emerge. "Perfect," Wells said, taking the bottle to examine the label. Meanwhile, 300 miles away, a woman who now called herself Lauren worked the checkout counter at a small boutique. Her life had stabilized over the years, modest but comfortable, with occasional recognition but increasingly rare public interest in her past identity. She had rebuilt too, in her own way. Not with the grand success of the man she'd betrayed, but with hard-earned wisdom and humility. The viral fame she'd once craved had proven hollow compared to genuine connection. Occasionally, she saw news of Wells Camden's success as vineyards, books, speaking engagements. In quiet moments, she recognized that he had been right about foundations. His had been built on substance, hers on appearance. When the storm came, only one had remained standing. As for Roan Camden, he had found unexpected success with his wellness retreat, modest compared to his brother's enterprises, but legitimate and growing. His relationship with Wells remained a work in progress, damaged but not destroyed by past betrayal. The internet had indeed never forgotten the barbecue bride. The video lived on in viral proposal compilations and cautionary relationship tales. But its power had diminished with time, becoming just another fleeting spectacle in the endless cycle of digital content. Wells Camden had moved beyond it entirely. As he prepared to toast the investors who had supported Ashes and Vine from concept to thriving enterprise, he reflected on the journey with quiet satisfaction. From the ashes of betrayal, he had built something authentic, enduring, and entirely his own. The ultimate revenge, he had discovered, wasn't destruction but creation, not in tearing down his betrayers, but in building himself up so completely that their actions became irrelevant to his story. The last toast wasn't to the past, but to the future he had claimed for himself, the one he had written entirely on his own terms.